Hey guys, this is Chris Henry. I'm the author of The Naked Way, the new novel from Blues Power Books. And I want to say thank you so much for checking out the video. Thank you for coming by my site. And thank you so much especially for your interest in the book. Everybody over the last year who said, hey, looking forward to it. When's it come out? Can't wait to read it. Thank you. You guys really helped me get through the whole process of getting it written and perfected, and I'm really happy to be able to bring the book out to you now. The video that I'm making today here is for the purpose of reading you a chapter from the book. Some of you may know I've had a website out for some time with the first chapter of the book available, and I've had a great response to the first chapter. It's very upbeat and kind of soaring and poetic and kind of points to the light. What I'm going to read you today is the flip side of that. This is kind of the dark side of the sex, drugs, rock and roll culture that my characters are living in. And I want to set it up for you just a little bit. This chapter takes place New Year's Eve, 1991. And the band, The Naked Way, which is a big part of this story in the book, has just played a show that exposed them to agents and hopefully taking them to the next level. They are trying to break out of a little kind of medium-sized American city and trying to make their way to fame and greatness. Everybody who hears them is convinced that they're the next big thing. And everybody's very taken with the lead singer, Alexander, and he's kind of a latter-day Jim Morrison, if you will. He's kind of a very dynamic, charismatic stage presence. One minute he sounds like a prophet, the next minute he's a snake oil salesman. Women are at his feet, and the question is, can he kind of harness all this mad brilliance that he has to get his band to the next level, or will everybody just be chewed up and destroyed in this whirlwind of chaos that kind of surrounds them? Real quickly, there are a bunch of characters in this scene. I won't explain them all. I think most of the relationships you'll understand when you hear it, but I'll tell you about two of the other characters, Bobby and Bethany, and in their backstories before the events in the book, they had been teenagers together in rehab, and they both had bad substance abuse problems. Bethany got it straightened out. Bobby did not. He fell off the wagon and stayed off it. Bethany was able to make a better direction for herself and get herself cleaned up and headed in the right direction. Until she encountered the Naked Way and got pulled into this debauchery and craziness going on around the band. Finally, the last thing to tell you to set it up is that the chapter begins with Eli, who is a buddy of the drummer of the band, Brandon. Brandon's girlfriend, Kate, got sick during the first song of the show, and Eli had the job to take her home. They may have ingested some questionable substances that contributed to making her feel sick, but Eli, being the good buddy, took his buddy's girlfriend home, and then he went home himself and tried to sleep it off, but his friends have another idea. So, without any further ado, this is an excerpt from the chapter called This Wide-Wasting Pestilence. The scream of the telephone smashed into his face, jolted his body, shocked his mind to attention. He reached out unseeing toward the piercing noise and found the receiver in time to silence it halfway through the second ring. Hello? Eli. Eli, are you there? It was Brandon. A twisted, frantic, deranged version of Brandon Eli had never heard before. Do you have your ID with you? Brandon asked. Brandon, Eli said, it's okay. Kate got sick. I took her home. Camille was supposed to tell you. She's fine. Brandon gave no sign of knowing who Kate was. Do you have your ID with you? He asked again. That proves who you are. You might be somebody. I don't know who I am right now. Does the ID make me real? Who am I, Eli? Who the fuck am I? See now, wait, Eli interjected. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes in the darkness. See what you're doing to yourself with semantics? You're you. You're still you, Brandon. Eli, will you check my ID? It says my name right here. And my age. We're so young. We're so goddamn young, Eli. Eli held his head and winced. He lay back and covered his face with a pillow. The clock read 5:12 a.m. Brandon, who's sober over there? He asked. Are you okay? The voice on the phone changed. It was Camille. Camille, talk to me, Eli said with relief. What the hell's going on? Shit, where do I start? She said. It was a great fucking show. The best yet. They totally blew the room away and half the crowd left before Twice Jilted went on. But then everything got screwed up. Amelia wanted a bigger cut on the door because the Naked Wave pulled most of the crowd in. Justin and the theater manager didn't want to give it to her. Marco went nuts and threatened people. Threw a bottle through a window. Earwax and Brandon finally got him out of there before the police came. Christ, then what? Eli said. Then everyone started getting high. Higher. Again. What happened to the meet with the agents afterwards? The skinny tie guys? The tour opening for Afghan wigs? Critically fucked. Amelia left them standing there while she got into a pissing match with Justin. I watched them shake their heads at each other and go. Earwax followed them and tried to talk them out of leaving. They patted him on the head and kept going right out the door. Fucking shit, Eli said. He heard the sound of the receiver jostling on the other end. Alexander's voice came on the line. Young Master Eli, we'll be needing your services, he said. Come over to Amelia's apartment, won't you, lad? You've got to lead your people out of Egypt. Bobby spent his whole paycheck on coke and acid from a guy Bethany knows. Quite a fancy little bird, this Bethany. She might be the queen of all my dreams. Alexander laughed, and a woman's musical voice laughed with him. Bethany. Eli had never heard a happy sound come from her mouth before. Eli gritted his teeth. Rich college girls get all the best drugs. You know that, Ponif. It's getting pretty heavy, Alexander said. The coke is half gone and the acid is hitting hard. The trip is coming back, but this time it's synthetic. Plastic fantastic, you dig? You fucking guys, Eli said. Did you pitch in any money? How's Bobby gonna pay rent? He just spent a shit ton on that fancy mountain bike. Money, Alexander said. You know that as high priest I can't concern myself with such matters. Please, Eli. Help us, Obi-Wan. You're our only hope. Your friend, young Master Brandon, is on the brink. He needs his rabbi already. Wait, what? Oh, Brandon says bring your ID. Eli arrived at Amelia's apartment to a scene of debauchery. The room was lit only with strings of Christmas lights and an eerie purple-black light glowing from a desk lamp. Eli's eyes adjusted slowly. Bethany was sitting on Alexander's lap in an overstuffed chair, kissing him. Brandon and Bobby were sitting at Amelia's desk, examining their IDs under the black light. In front of Bobby was a crude but poignant ink sketch of a naked Christ hanging on the cross. Giant nails pierced his wrists. Equally giant cock and balls hung between his legs. Bobby showed the drawing to Eli, who smiled approvingly. I've always preferred my messiahs well hung, he said. Camille blew him a kiss from where she sat reclining on the couch. Next to her was Earwax, who smiled blissfully and held a 12-pack of Milwaukee's best beer on his lap. Husker Du played low on Amelia's cheap boombox stereo. The tinny little speakers and the purple haze of psychedelic static in the room made their heavy rock songs sound cartoonish, even comical. Bobby tugged on Eli's sleeve. He used his ID to scrape together a line of cocaine on a mirror that lay flat on the desk. "Pull up a seat, big boy," he said. Eli shook him off. "I've sworn off coke before breakfast," he deadpanned. Brandon finally turned to look at Eli. His hair was a mess of blonde spikes, and his eyes were big as saucers. "Did you bring your ID?" he asked in deadly earnest. Eli patted him on the shoulder. "Yeah, buddy. I've got my ID. Still me. You're still you too, as far as I can tell." He turned to Alexander, who had gotten to his feet and loomed tall and shadowy in the half-dark, the Christmas lights like stars twinkling behind his head. "What the fuck, you guys?" said Eli. "No more drugs for the drummer. You're gonna kill him." Brandon shook Eli's hand off his shoulder and bent his head over the desk to snort another line through a chopped McDonald's straw. Alexander put his arm around Eli. "Don't worry about us, Mother Superior," he said. "There were agents at the show tonight. They left, but they'll be back. They saw what they saw. They heard what they heard. Nothing can stop destiny. Amelia has meetings set up for next week. We might open for the Meat Puppets on their tour this summer. Fuck the Afghan Whigs anyway. The wheel of fate is turning, young Master Eli. And now we will celebrate in nature. You're taking us on a magical mystery tour to paradise. Back to Eden. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden." Bethany came up from behind the singer, wrapping her arms around him. She undid the top button on his silk shirt as he spoke and ran her fingers over his taut, smooth chest. Her fingers were painted a deep, royal purple. Eli struggled to keep a smile on his face. "Amelia's a hell of a manager, isn't she?" he said. Alexander grinned an ironic grin. "She certainly is. Great job, darling," he shouted toward the bedroom. "Keep up the good work." Bethany cackled and kissed him on the cheek, neck, and ears. Eli went to the bedroom and found Amelia face down on the bed in panties and an open blouse. Her pert round bottom was highlighted by a shaft of light from the door. He smelled vomit. In the darkness, he kicked a trash can next to the bed. It turned out to be the puke receptacle. He checked to make sure her pulse and breathing were okay. Leaning in close, the scent of her perfume caught him up. Lilacs, deja vu, lost things. Then the smell of the trash can again, sickly sweet. The moment was gone. He brushed the hair away from Amelia's face, pulled the blanket over her, and closed the door behind him as he returned to the party. "She has a great ass, doesn't she?" said Alexander. Bethany slapped him full across the face, hard. Everyone turned to look. Alexander just stared at her, wry smile and laughing eyes. She laughed and pulled him to her by the back of the neck and kissed him. Earwax handed Eli a beer and put on a flaming lips tape. Eli slumped into a chair next to Brandon and Bobby. "This acid is seriously kicking in right now. Whoo, boy!" whooped the bass player, Earwax. Bobby snorted and grinned and wiped his sleeve across his face, smearing white powder on his shirt. Eli shook his head at the whole scene. "Crazy fuckers," he said. "Give me some of that." Without a word, Brandon cut 2 fat lines and slid the mirror to Eli. Their eyes met. Brandon's gaze was distant, unfocused, vaguely terrified. Eli covered a nostril and snorted deep through the other. He let out a gasp and a little howl as the coke hit his brain. A demented scarecrow smile slowly cracked open the tight facade of Brandon's face. Bobby laughed. "Don't get too comfortable, Pablo Escobar," said Alexander. "I wasn't kidding about the road trip." He handed Eli a set of keys. "To Earwax's van," he said. "City Park, Captain." He executed a crisp salute. Eli had to laugh. "Your mission, if you accept it," said Alexander, "is to drive this motley crew of rock stars, drug addicts, and vagabonds to the park for a healing dawn ritual. A healing dawn ritual. A cleansing ceremony in nature." "Cleansing ceremony? I'll give you a cleansing ceremony right up your rear end," snorted Camille. She turned to Bethany, tilting her head towards Alexander and silently mouthing, "What the fuck?" Bethany smiled coquettishly and shrugged. "Who, me?" Camille rolled her eyes and took a slug from Eli's beer. "Alrighty then," said Eli. "Everybody in the van." The bathroom door opened slowly and a new face emerged. A pouty, pretty, pixie-faced girl with an almost boyishly petite figure and a bobbed brunette haircut drifted shyly across the floor. "Eli, this is Tessa," said Camille. "She latched onto us during the show. I think she's tripping pretty hard. Tessa, honey, you want some water? Beer?" Tessa turned slowly in response to her name, as if in a dream. Bobby smiled and offered her a beer. Her face flushed red, and she took the beer without a word. "I think she came with Earwax's cousin," Camille said. "Or maybe that guy I had the cross-cultural psychology class with last year. I can't remember. Tessa, honey, do you remember? Who did you come to the show with?" Tessa just stood there silently, looking at her shoes and sipping timidly on her beer. "Oh well," said Camille. "We're going on a little trip. Come on, darling." Tessa smiled and shuffled after Bobby as they all left the apartment for the van. A battered old pickup truck crawled past along the street outside as they piled into the van. A bearded old man with a wool cap pulled down tight over his head threw newspapers at darkened doorways from the back of the pickup truck. Steam hissed from manhole covers in the street and drifted up through the glow of pink-orange streetlights into the blackness of infinite night. Bobby pulled out a little plastic baggie with tiny, colorful LSD blotters and dangled it in front of Eli as he started the van. "No way, buddy," Eli said, waving it off. "How am I going to take care of you guys if I'm out there orbiting Jupiter with you?" Camille handed Eli a cassette tape of Lou Reed's New York album for the van's stereo. "It takes a busload of faith to get by, baby," she said before kissing him on the cheek and piling into the back of the van. Earwax in the passenger seat wrinkled his nose at the sound coming from the speakers. "Lou Reed? The Velvets were great, but he's too old. He's over." "Lou Reed is never over," Alexander roared from the back seat. "Your grandchildren's grandchildren, 10 times removed, will all be dead and buried and forgotten. Lou fucking Reed will still be happening." "Okay, Grandpa, take it easy," Earwax snorted. "I could really go for some Slayer right now, is all I'm saying." The van pulled up to a red traffic light along a commercial strip. A storefront neon danced for the tripper's eyes in the urban wasteland gloom of pre-dawn. Earwax bobbed his head to the music in the passenger seat despite his earlier protest. Eli looked in the rearview mirror and saw Bethany. Her glassy eyes shone with an unearthly light. A passing headlight flashed in the rear view, momentarily blinding him. When the light receded, Eli and Bethany's eyes met in the mirror. She looked into him and through him, like a cat would. Her thick black mascara and arched painted eyebrows amplified her coked-out glare. She was sitting in Alexander's lap, running her fingers through his long wavy hair. The singer leaned into view and grinned a wicked grin at Eli from behind his Wayfarer shades, which he wore unironically in the dead of night. As the van straightened out onto Colfax Avenue, Eli caught sight of Bobby in the rear view. Little Tessa sat on his lap, grinning from ear to ear. Their faces were close together. Bobby laughed nervously and looked away, out the window, into the night. "Pretty colors," he said, pointing out the red riot of neon to Tessa as if she were a child. She laughed. Passing crimson and blue light danced across her face with the movement of the van. Bobby laughed with her until he got a mouthful of Bethany's hair. Alexander had bent her backwards in a deep kiss that pushed her back into Bobby and Tessa's space. Tessa just giggled. Bobby spat Bethany's blonde and black streaked hair out of his mouth. Eli watched Bobby's eyes narrow in anger and bulge in disbelief before he found center again and forced out a laugh. He put his hand on Tessa's back tentatively. Alexander pulled Bethany back up into his lap and reached a hand up her top. She let out a little moan. Jesus Christ, enough already, screamed Camille from the far back seat. Get a fucking room. The van rolled to a stop in an empty lot at City Park under barren looming trees and silent stars. Earwax got out of the passenger seat and opened the side door. Everyone tumbled out into the moonlit fantasy landscape. The park had a panoramic view of the city skyline. Lights twinkled from empty office skyscrapers a few miles away, and behind them, in the distance, the Rocky Mountains spanned the darkened horizon in mute meditation. Slowly, the mountains began to gather the blackness of night back into themselves. Intimations of first morning light turned the distant snowcaps a ghostly deep blue. A man-made cross of light on a mountainside, a thumbnail in the sky 100 miles away, drew lost souls hovering in the ether to itself, like an airport runway beckoning to lost pilots in the fog. Layers and shades and stripes of blue and black and indigo throbbed and melted and unfolded slowly into one another above the horizon. "The mountains are breathing, man," said Brandon. Alexander put his arm around the drummer. "They're sleeping. They're dreaming of us," he said. Earwax leaped up onto a park bench and held his beer high, toasting the horizon. "They're thinking, how can we be as cool as the naked fucking way?" Tessa stood apart, staring up at a skeletal elm tree with childlike wonder. She wrapped her arms around its trunk and let out a little sigh of contentment. "I thought tree hugger was a metaphor," Bobby said. "Like a mean stereotype made up by Republicans?" "Looks like you've got the real thing," Eli said. "She's cute, no?" "Hell yeah," Bobby said, pulling out a cigarette from a pack in his pocket. Tessa wandered away out of the clearing and into a thicket of bushes and trees. "Watch out, the raccoons will eat you," Alexander hollered. "Leave her be," said Bobby. Sounds of rustling leaves and snapping twigs came from the darkness. Finally, Tessa returned with a big self-satisfied smile, holding a large branch in her arms. The branch was of dead, cracked, graying wood, and was nearly as long as she was tall. She cradled it awkwardly, holding it tenderly to her chest like a newborn, even as its end dragged heavily on the ground. "What have you got there?" Bobby asked. She frowned and pulled the branch closer to her bosom. "Mine," she said. It was the first word Eli had heard her say all night. Bobby laughed but nodded approvingly. "A walking stick," he said. "I think she's on to something. There's not much we can latch onto in this world of bullshit and lies." He shot a pained expression at Bethany. "Hang on to the most basic thing you can find. A simple, sturdy walking stick. It's a good start." At this, Tessa smiled and sat down next to him on the park picnic table bench, still clutching her prized find. "This is brilliant," Eli said. "Give somebody a couple tabs of acid, you get to watch the whole development of the human race all over again. Consciousness starting all over from square one. The invention of technology. First, the stick. Next, the Stone Age?" "No, don't you see?" interjected Alexander. "You of all people, young Master Eli. This is metaphysics, not materialism. It's a totem. She's found her God. Worship is what separates us from the animals. She's like a walking illustration from one of your religious anthropology books." "There are spirits in the trees and in the branches," said Camille, who stood apart with her back to the group, staring at the moon hanging over the horizon of darkened city and mountains. Her silhouette was still, except for the smoke from her cigarette that drifted up to the sky. "And there are spirits in the birds and the sun and the sky, too," she said. "Okay, Mother Earth, not you, too. Jesus Christ," exclaimed Bobby. "I'm surrounded by fucking ecstatic hippie Jesus freak Jungians. But I don't accept it. I don't believe in what I can't see." "You can't see love, Bobby," Bethany said. He sprung to his feet. "From you. That's rich. This," he drew a frantic line in the air connecting Bethany and Alexander, "this proves to me that there is no such thing as love. No such thing. We're just monkeys running around looking for anything hot-blooded with a pulse to grind on." He paced around the group in a little circle, making his case to the whole group like a lawyer arguing before a jury. His eyes were bloodshot, and his fingers twitched where they hung at his side. "I'm losing all faith in humanity right now," he said. "Are we just apes? Armpit-scratching monkeys? Is this as good as it gets?" Brandon snorted a bump of coke off his apartment key. "This is pretty goddamn good, Bobby," he said. As if to second Brandon's affirmation, just then the peaks of the surreal skyline over his shoulder, both man-made and natural, were touched by highlights of rose from the coming dawn in the east. "I have to agree with Brandon, Bobby," nodded Eli. "Pretty goddamn good. You can't say we aren't living the life now, can you?" "We were born monkeys, Bobby," said Alexander, his voice taking on a theatrical tenor. "But we become gods. By our will, we become gods incarnate." His blue eyes were wide, glowing with self-belief. "We walk the earth as supermen," he shouted, leaping onto a creaky steel merry-go-round. Earwax gave the steel wheel a push, spinning Alexander around faster and faster. The singer stood in the rotating center, hair flying, laughing, fists raised defiantly to the sky. Bethany ran to him, leaping heedlessly onto the merry-go-round. Their limbs entangled in a blur, and Bethany screamed. They went flying off the merry-go-round into the sand, thrown clear by the force of the spinning wheel. Their bodies lay in a heap, unmoving. "Oh, shit," said Earwax, frozen in place. The creaky merry-go-round spun on without its passengers. The cold metal glinted dull in the moonlight. At last the human pile stirred. Alexander leapt to his feet, laughing. He picked up Bethany in his arms and carried her back to the group through the web of shadows under the haunted trees. "The gods die and are resurrected to new life," he proclaimed. Bethany clung to him, arms around his neck. Alexander put her down on her feet. Camille handed her a fresh beer and brushed the sand out of her hair with her hands. Bethany straightened herself, tossed her hair, put her hands on her hips, as if she were posing on an invisible catwalk. Eli could see Bobby wanted to fight. He stepped up to Alexander, shuffling his feet on the ground like a bull ready to charge, even though he seemed half the other man's size. The singer smiled at him indulgently. Bobby stared back, inarticulate rage spinning inside him, shaking his head back and forth, kicking the ground and spraying dirt at his antagonist's feet. Finally, he poked a finger into Alexander's chest. "No more of this mythopoetic psychobabble," he said. Bobby's soft brown eyes were bugging out of his head, his pupils huge from the drugs and adrenaline. "That might work on stage, but not in the real world. You can't just..." His voice trailed off as he stared at Bethany. She circled away from him, keeping Alexander between herself and Bobby. "Just cut the fucking bullshit," Bobby shouted. "I see a world of people struggling, fighting, suffering, but I can't see what it's all for. Love? God? Spirits? Fucking mysticism? Bullshit. Give me something real." He was practically frothing at the mouth, straining to meet Bethany's eyes as she maneuvered to keep away. "Don't you remember the things we went through together, Bethany? What the fuck are you doing? Doing coke and drinking all night? And since when do you fucking smoke?" A cigarette burned between his own two fingers as he pointed them accusingly at Bethany. She turned indignant. "What am I doing?" she screamed at him from behind the towering singer. "This shit is gonna kill you, Bobby." "Fucking hypocrite," shouted Bobby. "Still using your Narcotics Anonymous keychain? 2 years clean my ass. You've been on a bender of epic fucking proportions ever since you met this wannabe rock star," he sneered, pointing at Alexander. "When's the last time you were at a meeting?" Bethany started weeping. "Fuck you, Bobby. Fuck you and fuck every minute of every hour I spent with your stupid addict ass. Listening to you tear yourself down over and over again, never changing, never growing." Now Alexander was keeping her from getting at Bobby. He scooped her up in his long arms and lifted her away as she lunged at him. "You're a hopeless case," she growled at Bobby through gritted teeth, straining to break through Alexander's arms. "When's the last time you were at a meeting?" "August 28th, 1989, that's when," Bobby yelled at the top of his lungs. "But I don't pretend I'm something I'm not, and I'm never going back." He dug through his pockets and found a coin, which he held out to her. "Here's a quarter," he said. "Call your sponsor." Bethany surged at him again. Alexander held her back with evident effort, but equal amusement. His eyes met Eli's. Alexander flashed a wicked, mirthful smile. "Man, chilly you guys," said Alexander. "The police gotta come through here once in a while, right?" Bobby ignored him. "Oh, and you know what?" Bobby said, pointing a cigarette at Alexander, but giving significant looks to Brandon and Earwax as well. "Your band fucking sucks." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "It's just another con, isn't it?" said Bobby. "Smoke, lights, noise. And you've got people who should know better." He tilted his head at Camille and Eli, who responded with comic surprised "Who, me?" shrugs. "Convinced that you're some kind of witch doctor or alchemist about to turn lead into gold or some shit. Or fucking William Blake with a power trio. When what you're really doing is bouncing around, jerking yourself off all over the stage, getting everybody all lathered up until the girls' private parts are engorged like fucking orangutans." "Whoa!" Camille and Bethany yelled in unison. Bobby was the one who was all lathered up. He wiped spittle from his mouth. "Actually, Bobby," piped up Earwax, "if I'm not mistaken, it's the bonobo monkeys that are known for engorged sexual organs. I wrote a report about them in high school once. You see, when the female's monthly cycle—" Bethany dismissed him with a wave. "Oh, really, Bobby?" she screamed. "Who's the wanker? Some people talk about art and poetry and philosophy until they're blue in the face, but some people just do it. Some people stop and write it down and do the work and make something." Bobby ran his hands through his sandy curls in exasperation. "Oh yeah? Some people have mommies and daddies and trust funds and brand new Jeeps and expensive educations." He circled around, trying to get closer to Bethany. She and Alexander maneuvered away, matching him step for step, as if in a choreographed dance. "You know what I have? I have a library card," bawled Bobby. "A library card, a job cutting meat and seafood for $7.25 an hour, and 0 fucking days sober." "Fuck you, Bobby," Bethany screamed. Her face was streaked with tears and running mascara and rage. "You're just pure pain. That's all you are," she hissed. The three of them stood frozen in a pose of tragicomic confrontation. Bobby was a scrappy, undersized mutt poised to attack. The moment extended a beat too long. Bethany writhed in Alexander's arms between them. She grunted and sobbed and struggled as Alexander whispered endearments and calm in her ear. It sounded to Eli like the unsynced audio track of a bad 70s porno flick. Brandon stood up slowly and deliberately, not looking at anyone in particular, and took a slug from his beer. Finally, he cocked his head to one side thoughtfully and asked, "Does anybody remember laughter?" The crisis of the trip had passed for Brandon. His sardonic, aloof cool returned. They did remember laughter. Bobby laughed in spite of himself. "Brandon, you son of a bitch," he chuckled. Laughter washed over the group, except for Bethany, who glared holes through the back of Brandon's head. She turned and buried her face in Alexander's chest. "No tears," Alexander said, stroking her hair as she wept softly. There, there. Listen, darling. I'm writing a poem for you." He spun away from her, gesturing like a high school drama club Shakespearean orator. "The world is a poem that we walk through together. A poem is a new world in miniature. And this," he swept his arms, taking in the vast shrouded universe being born again around them, "is a new world. Our new world." He dropped to one knee before Bethany and took her hand. He looked up at her beseechingly. "True opener of my eyes, Prime angel blessed, he said. She grinned weakly at him through the sobs. Be glad of spirit, my love. Much better seems this vision, and more hope of peaceful days portends than all the pains we've suffered. We leave it all behind and go forward into our own kingdom. He kissed her hand tenderly. Then he rose to his feet and bounded up onto a large boulder. From atop it he addressed his tribe like an acid-crazed Old Testament prophet. And yet, even in the new dawn, there are demons tugging at our souls, he intoned solemnly. Accuse not nature, she has done her part. At this, a flight of geese took off from the park's man-made lake, which the creeping light had revealed in the middle distance. The geese honked and soared into the crumbling darkness of the sky. The surface of the lake rippled silently, with pixels of copper and gold and violet, shifting like static on an old television set left on overnight. Alexander smiled, gratified at nature's endorsement of his rants. With obsequious majesty she approved my pleaded reason, he smirked knowingly. By my love, he looked meaningfully at Bethany, by our love, my queen, this wide-wasting pestilence is transformed. He was interrupted by a volley of small missiles. One hit him in the chest, another fell at his feet, bouncing off the boulder to the ground. Earwax was chucking pine cones at him. Hey man, show's over, Earwax said. Save it for next time. Alexander tisked at him. Dear boy, can't you see? Your brutish vice disfigures your own likeness, not God's. Earwax chuckled and shook his head and opened another beer. Whatever you say, you're the authority on brutish vice, he said. Bobby sat down on the picnic table bench next to Tessa and laughed. His rage had subsided. Eli watched as he tentatively put his hand on Tessa's. She giggled shyly and looked away but didn't move her hand. With her other hand, she nervously stroked the totem stick. Bethany approached the boulder where Alexander stood. She trembled and hugged her chest with her folded arms and looked down at the ground. He leapt down to meet her. Please, shut up, she begged him. I'm cold. I'm tripping too hard right now. She wrapped her arms around him and slid down to her knees. Her sobs redoubled as she clung to his waist. Dawn began boiling over just below the horizon. The growing light showed her eyes puffy and red, mascara running down her face. In the strange psychedelic morning, she looked like a broken, defeated goddess, lovingly rendered in a pre-Raphaelite painting, or an impossibly beautiful supermodel in a debauched postmodern fashion shoot staged by a sadistic photographer. No more talking, she cried on her knees, clinging to Alexander's long, lean body, her nails digging into his thigh. Camille shook her head. Get up, Bethany. You're embarrassing me. Don't speak, Bethany growled. Don't anybody fucking talk anymore. Alexander crouched down and brushed the hair back from her face and wiped the tears from her eyes. She sniffled and looked up at him. Eli could barely make out her hushed voice. I have some pills, she whimpered, in my purse. More coke in the van. Alexander nodded. They rose and he held her hand and led her to the van, parked 100 feet away. An awkward silence descended on the rest of the group as the two climbed in the van and closed the door behind them. Bobby's face clouded over again. He pulled out a fifth of Jack Daniels from his back pocket and took an angry shot. Tessa frowned and hugged her branch. At first, Eli thought the squeaking sound was an animal. He looked around for a bird or a squirrel in the bushes. The sound was regular, rhythmic. Then a sigh and a moan coming from the van. The squeaking sound was the sound of the van rocking. The group let out a collective groan, followed by snickers and hoots. Tessa stared at the van, wide-eyed, as it visibly rocked back and forth in place. She rose to her feet. She turned to Bobby and spoke her second word of the night. Here, she said. handing her tree branch totem to him. He took it with a fragile smile. Tessa turned and walked east towards the van, just as the first rays of the sun came pouring over the horizon. She went straight into the honeyed light. The glare silhouetted her slender figure, surrounding her with pinwheels and streamers of pure radiance. The clouds drifting above her were pink and orange cotton candy. Dollops of hot caramel and butterscotch sunlight fell around her, splashing the parking lot and the van and the trees with color. She opened the door to the van, no hesitation, climbed in, and closed the door behind her. The rocking noise stopped abruptly. "Oh, shit," said Earwax. "That girl has some stones." "Jesus Christ," said Camille, lighting a cigarette, as if his ego isn't big enough already. One more notch in the belt. Brandon whistled a dissonant melody and tapped out a nervous beat on his leg. Eli slowly got up and walked over to where Camille stood. He stretched his legs, then dug around in his pocket and handed her a joint. The van began rocking again. Bobby stood up. "Motherfucker," he muttered under his breath. With all his strength, he threw the whiskey bottle at the boulder Alexander had stood and preached on. It shattered loudly into 1,000 pieces. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much. I know that was kind of long, but I think that was one of the best chapters to share with you because it gives you a lot of the texture and the dynamics of the relationships and the style of the book. So thank you so much. Please buy The Naked Way. It's available at Amazon now. I'm Chris Henry. I love you. Thank you.